Mr. Parsons?
Have you got the
Mr.
judge
Parsons?
take the secretary?
Yes.
You can't take a chance of this one, you know.
How do you do, Miss, is it Merritt?
That's right. I wanted to have a word with you about your opening.
Oh, yes.
Were you going to mention the divorce?
Well, I thought I might. The case is based on circumstantial evidence. It does appear the naughty lady used to knock 7 bells out of the child at one time, so it does seem fairly relevant to me.
I shall be objecting to the divorce court evidence.
Ah, very well. Well, I'll keep it in until you put your objection, and his lordship allows me to use it.
If he does.
That women should wear mini gowns and blonde wigs.
Oh, cheer the place up a bit.
Yes, the standby jury.
Yes, they are.
Linda Morgan was divorced by her husband 2 years ago. He was awarded custody of the children. Since then, the children have visited their mother against their father's wishes, and he obtained an injunction to prevent her seeing them. However, the visits continued, and on one, their eldest child, Julian, received severe head injuries. The father reported it to the police, and they have charged Mrs. Morgan with assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. The case is to be tried in the Crown Court.
How say you, Linda May Morgan? Are you guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Members of the jury, Linda May Morgan stands indicted. And the charge is that on May the 23rd, she assaulted Julian Morgan and maliciously inflicted grievous bodily harm. It is your duty to say, having heard the evidence, whether she be guilty or not guilty.
Members of the jury, you're here to...
Yes, Miss Merritt? I should have thought that was a pretty uncontentious remark of Mr. Parsons.
Yes, my lord. However, I notice a policeman in the court. If he should be a witness for the prosecution, he should be out of the court, my lord.
Do you intend to call the sergeant, Mr. Parsons?
I do, my lord.
Then he should be out of court.
As your lordship pleases.
Thank you, my lord.
Members of the jury, you are here today to try a most serious case. A child lies unconscious in Foodster General Hospital. He has been in the United States since May the 23rd last year. I shall be bringing evidence to show that his chances of a full recovery are negligible, that even his chances of regaining consciousness are slim. I call Peter Morgan.
Peter Morgan.
What is your religion?
Churchman.
Take the book in your right hand and read aloud the words written on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Peter Edward Morgan.
I am.
The former husband of the accused.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Morgan, will you please tell the court why you divorced your wife?
She was cruel to the children.
Now, what do you mean precisely in relation to the children?
My lord,
well,
we shall wish to challenge the admissibility of any evidence referring to matters that precede the offence, namely evidence from the divorce case. No doubt your lordship has read the depositions from the magistrate's court.
Yes, I have, Miss Merritt.
May I submit, my lord, that it would be a good thing to settle the question of admissibility now, at this stage, before my learned friend raises the issue in the jury's mind.
Yes, I think so. Members of the jury, you are required to try this case on the evidence, some of which may be against the rules which make for a fair trial. That is a matter for me to decide. So will you now retire whilst I listen to counsel's arguments? I hope we won't keep you too long.
You now move out of the jury box, ladies and gentlemen, please. I shall join you outside the courtroom.
Miss Merritt?
My lord, I submit that any evidence concerning the actions or behaviour of the accused prior to the offence is inadmissible. Surely it is up to the prosecution to show, if they can, that Mrs. Morgan struck her child on May the 23rd of last year. What happened 2 or 3 years ago is surely irrelevant.
As your lordship will be well aware, the evidence of the assault is circumstantial. There is no one who actually witnessed the blow. However, at the divorce hearing 2 years ago, the very basis of Mr. Morgan's complaint was that his wife's violent treatment of the children was more than he could be expected to accept, and this made the marriage impossible. Now, the divorce was uncontested, and your lordship may feel that this amounts to an acceptance on the part of the accused that she did, in fact, repeatedly beat the children.
My lord, the evidence of the present assault is circumstantial. There are no eyewitnesses. Now, however hard that may make life for my learned friend, surely this doesn't justify breaking the normal rules of evidence.
My lord, the prosecution wished to show that Mrs. Morgan has a violent history. No doubt my learned friend will be calling character witnesses in an attempt to prove that she was a sweetly reasonable mother. We feel we should be allowed to produce evidence that in another court, when it was stated that Mrs. Morgan was a violent person, that for reasons of her own, she chose not to contest that allegation, especially when the evidence bears on the actual child named in this present charge.
Yes, I shall allow the evidence. Bring in the jury.
Mr. Morgan, how many children do you have?
2, Jennifer and Julian.
And Mrs. Morgan used to hit both of them?
Yes, mostly Julian.
That's the boy who now lies unconscious in the hospital.
Yes.
Now, what damage did she do to the children?
My lord, surely that is a medical question that the witness is not competent to answer.
My lord, I rephrase the question. Mr. Morgan, how did you know she was hitting the children?
Well, when I used to come home from work, I used to see the cuts and the bruises.
Cuts and bruises?
Yes. And one time, Julian had a broken arm.
Now, Mr. Morgan, presumably you confronted your wife at the time of assaulting the children.
Oh, yes. Well, we were always having rows about it.
Yes, did she always deny it?
No, sometimes she did. Sometimes she used to say that Julian had been naughty.
Yes. How old was Julian at this time?
When we got divorced, he was about 8.
I see. And Mrs. Morgan used to say that he had been so naughty that she was forced to punish him to the extent of breaking his arm.
My lord.
Quite.
Sorry, my
Mr.
lord.
Parsons, please don't interrupt me, Mr. Parsons. And please don't ask such blatant leading questions.
As your lordship pleases.
Continue.
Thank you, my lord. Miss Morgan, did Mrs. Morgan ever admit to beating the children?
Yes.
Yes. And what happened finally?
Well, it ruined the marriage. When I was always on edge at work, just wondering what was going to happen at home, and then when I got home, there was always rows. So finally, it just wasn't worth it. I decided to divorce my wife.
Yes. And did Mrs. Morgan try to dissuade you from this idea of a divorce?
No, she said she was glad it was all over.
Yes, I see. And your wife didn't defend at the divorce hearing?
No.
And who was awarded the custody of the children?
I was.
Yes. And your wife didn't dispute that either?
No, and she wasn't granted access either.
I see. What happened after that?
Well, it was all right for a few months. Then she started to entice them round to her place.
Enticing them?
Yes. Well, she used to offer them sweets. She used to spoil them.
Yes. And what was your attitude to that?
Well, I was very worried. I've gone through all the trouble of the divorce just to protect the children, and there she was seeing them again.
Yes. So what did you do?
Well, I went round to see her several times and asked her not to entice the children.
Yes.
And every time she said she would stop, but she never did. So eventually I took her to court. And the judge ruled that she wasn't to see the children.
Yes. And that finished it?
No, she saw them again. So I took her to court again, and the judge ruled that if she broke his ruling again, then she'd have to go to prison.
Yes. Now, all this was happening before the incident of May the 23rd last?
Yeah.
So Mrs. Morgan was in fact disobeying the court ruling?
Yeah.
I see. Now, Mr. Morgan, can you tell us what happened on May the 23rd last year?
Well, I got home from work about the usual time, around about 5:30, and I went round to a neighbour of ours to pick up Jennifer and Julian. She looks after them when they come home from school. But they weren't there. So I thought, well, maybe they'd gone round to their mother's place. So I went round there, but they weren't there either. And the next door neighbour said that there'd been an accident, and Julian had been taken off in an ambulance to the hospital. And their mother had gone with them, and they'd taken Jennifer as well.
Yes. So what did you do then?
Well, I went straight round the hospital.
Yes. Now, Mr. Morgan, will you tell the court exactly what happened when your wife saw you at the hospital?
She was sitting outside a small ward. When she saw me, she said, I didn't do it, Peter. I didn't touch him. I didn't do it.
Yes. Now, had you said anything to her at all?
No, nothing at all. She just jumped up and kept repeating it. I didn't do it. I didn't touch him, Peter.
Yes.
Obvious to me she had a very guilty conscience.
My lord.
Yes, Miss Merritt. Mr. Morgan, you must not draw conclusions. Just answer counsel's questions.
Oh, sorry, my lord.
So what did you do then, Mr. Morgan?
Well, I found out how serious it was, and then I went straight round to the police. That was after I'd taken Jennifer on.
Well, why did you go to the police?
Well, it was obvious to me that she'd hit him again. But the main reason was I didn't want her in the hospital when Julian regained consciousness.
I see.
I mean, that lad suffered enough. Least I could do was to make sure that the woman who'd beaten him half to death wasn't sitting at his bedside when he woke up waiting to have another go.
Mr. Morgan, you dislike your wife, don't you?
I don't have a wife.
I'm sorry, your ex-wife.
Yes, I don't like people that beat children.
But have you any evidence at all, that since the divorce, your wife has struck either of the children?
I have a son unconscious in hospital.
As a result of an accident, Mr. Morgan.
So she says.
Indeed she does. Now, Mr. Morgan, was your marriage happy before the birth of your children?
Yeah, it was happy enough.
Happy enough for whom, Mr. Morgan?
Well, for me, certainly. And I think for my wife as well.
Your ex-wife. I think you'll find, Mr. Morgan, that she will disagree with you.
My lord, is this relevant?
My lord, my learned friend has succeeded in introducing evidence concerning the divorce hearings. That being so, surely I should be allowed to do the same. I would like to show that the conditions of Mrs. Morgan's life have so altered that it makes it unlikely in the extreme that she would strike either of her children now.
Very well, Miss Merritt.
Thank you, my lord. I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that from the beginning your marriage was unhappy.
No.
Mr. Morgan, did you have a happy sex life with your wife?
What?
Well, Mr. Morgan?
I find this very embarrassing, my lord.
So do we all, Mr. Morgan, but I'm afraid you must answer the question.
That was satisfactory. We had 2 children.
Yes, I shall come to that. And would you describe yourself as an affectionate husband?
Yeah.
Would it surprise you then if I told you that on the contrary your wife found you cold, hard and unresponsive?
No, but I mean, she's a woman, isn't she? I mean...
What do you mean, Mr. Morgan? That women need more affection than men?
Yeah.
And you found yourself unable to supply this to your ex-wife?
I was working hard to keep the home together, pay the mortgage off, get the place furnished.
And all this was more important than showing your wife that you loved her?
No, that was the way I showed her I loved her.
I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that your marriage started fairly well, but that your consistently cold and clinical attitude towards your wife poisoned it.
No, I tried to show her I loved her.
But you didn't succeed, did you, Mr. Morgan?
Well, I did my best.
But you must have been aware that the best was not good enough.
I don't understand what you mean.
I must confess, Miss Merritt, neither do I.
I'm sorry, my lord. I'll try to make it clearer.
I should be pleased.
Thank you, my lord. I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that you constantly found fault with your wife.
No.
That she was starved of affection, and your constant demands for an impeccable standard of housekeeping slowly destroyed any self-confidence your wife had.
No, it doesn't take much to keep a house clean, does it?
Well, it depends on how you define clean. I mean, hospitals spend thousands of pounds on keeping their operating theatres clean. Did you want to live in a completely germ-free environment?
No, of course not. I just wanted a decent standard, that's all.
But you will agree that the cleanliness or otherwise of the house was a constant source of friction between you and your wife.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Now, let's come to the children. Who wanted them?
Well, we both did.
Yes, but who suggested that you start a family?
Well, it may have been my wife, I can't remember.
Yes. I put it to you that she pleaded with you to be allowed to start a family.
No, she didn't have to. I've always wanted a family. Just I want to get things sorted out first, that's all. Get the place in order.
Now, why do you think she wanted to have babies?
Well, it's only natural, isn't it? I mean, she's a woman. I mean, they get, well, broody.
But she told you explicitly, didn't she, Mr. Morgan? I put it to you that she told you she wanted something to love.
Well, she may have said something like that. I can't remember.
Now, when they arrived, did they bring happiness to your family?
Yeah, just she was such a bad organiser. I mean, it was bad enough before the children came. I mean, afterwards, it was just chaos. There was litter all over the place, mess everywhere.
And you made quite sure that she was made well aware of your disappointment, didn't
well,
you,
I told her,
Morgan?
yeah, of course, it was my place as well, wasn't it? I mean, I was at work all day. She was there living at home. I mean, it was her job, wasn't it?
I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that you made your wife's life a misery and that she was terrified of you.
I never hit her. She can't say that.
She doesn't say that, Mr. Morgan. But I put it to you that you bullied her just the same by nagging her and setting her impossibly high standards.
No.
Why did she hit the children, Mr. Morgan?
I don't know. You better ask her. She can't get out of the fact that she used to hit them and she agreed to a divorce rather than defend herself because she knew it was hopeless.
She knew she was helpless, Mr. Morgan, and that's a very different thing. Now, let's come to the final point. Why did the children constantly keep running back to their mother?
She used to entice them.
How?
I don't know. She used to offer them sweets and stuff like that. I don't know.
You're asking us to believe that Mrs. Morgan, a cruel, violent mother, your words, Mr. Morgan, only had to offer her children a bag of toffees and they came running back?
She used to hit them.
Not since the divorce. Mr. Morgan, are you telling us that you honestly believe that the children were afraid of what their mother would do to them if they didn't go back?
No, of course not.
But you tried to stop them going back.
Yeah.
And you failed.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to see her. Because in spite of their history together, they still loved her.
She enticed them.
All right, Mr. Morgan. Why did you wait so long before divorcing your wife?
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, for years you stood by watching your boy being hit and you did nothing.
Well, I didn't know.
You didn't know?
No.
I mean, your son was being terrorized by his mother and he didn't tell you?
Well, not in the beginning, no. I only found out when I questioned him.
And I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that long before the divorce, Julian received more genuine warmth from your wife than he ever did from you, in spite of the occasional slaps.
No.
Nevertheless, he didn't want to tell you about the times that his mother hit him.
He was a child.
But I put it to you, Mr. Morgan, that he was old enough to know who really loved him.
Oh, my lord.
I have no further questions, my lord.
Let's clear up one or two things, shall we, Mr. Morgan? About this fanatical cleanliness. Did you ever have any ambition to take out an appendix on your kitchen table?
No.
Perform any other surgical operations in your home?
No, of course not.
How then would you define your attitude to the cleanliness of your home?
I just wanted a decent place so I could bring the kids up in, that's all.
Precisely. Did you love your wife, Mr. Morgan?
When?
Well, before you had a family?
Yeah, of course I did.
Yes. And do you consider yourself a cold, hard, and unresponsive man?
No, of course not. It's just that when I saw the house that I worked so hard to get fall into chaos and my wife beating my children, well, any love I had for her just died, that's all.
You are Dr. Arnold Anderson.
I am.
And you're a consultant at Fulchester General Hospital.
Yes.
Now, will you please tell the court, Dr. Anderson, when you first saw Julian Morgan?
At about 5 o'clock on May the 23rd, I was called to the casualty department to see him.
Yes, and what did you find?
Julian Morgan was in a state of coma, very deeply unconscious. X-rays showed a fracture of the back of the skull, and encephalograph readings showed minimal brain activity.
Yes. Could you come to any conclusions how he had received this injury?
He received a blow, I should say, on the back of the head.
Well, could you say anything about how he had received the blow?
Not really. It must have been pretty heavy. There was a line of bruising across the skull, about 3 inches above the neck.
Well, could this have occurred as a result of falling down some stairs?
Yes, though I haven't seen such an injury caused by a fall downstairs before.
I see. Dr. Anderson, did you discover any other injuries?
Yes, I examined the boy minutely and found 4 other bruises and 1 slight cut. He had a bruise on his left shin, his upper right thigh, and on both forearms.
Now, you say you examined the boy minutely. Why did you do that?
I could say I always do. But I was especially careful in this case because the attitude of the mother alerted me.
Alerted you? To what?
As soon as I came into the casualty room, his mother rushed up to me, and she kept saying, "I didn't hit him, he fell, he fell."
So you found it necessary to make a particularly detailed examination of the boy because the mother was protesting too much.
You could put it like that, yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, Dr. Anderson, just how seriously injured is Julian Morgan?
Very seriously indeed. The progress is very depressing.
Oh, my God.
Do you expect him to make a recovery into a normal, healthy child?
No.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Now, give her some water there, will you?
Dr. Anderson, you said it was an unusual injury to have been received by a fall on the stairs.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yes. Usually one would expect the skull bruising to be fractured, or at least the external bruising to be at the front or the side of the skull. This was at the back, just underneath the bulge of the skull.
I see. But if anyone twisted as they fell, it is perfectly possible that the blow could have been received where, in fact, you found it.
Yes.
And about the bruise, could you show us on your own head the area and shape of the bruising?
It was about 3 inches long across the skull.
It seemed to me, Doctor, that is perfectly consistent with the blow caused by the tread of a stair.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let's come to the other bruises you found. How serious were they?
Not serious at all.
Trivial, in fact.
They were very slight.
Dr. Anderson, you've heard of the battered baby syndrome.
Yes, of course.
And in cases of child injury, hospitals are now very aware that they must be alert for such distressing cases.
Indeed, yes.
Did Julian Morgan strike you as being a battered child?
No.
Because the bruising could be accounted for by the 1,000 natural shocks that the flesh of an active 11-year-old is heir to.
Yes.
Nevertheless, you did suspect that Julian might be a battered child because of the attitude of his mother.
Yes.
I put it to you, Doctor, that parents quite frequently feel guilty when their child has an accident, even if they couldn't be remotely responsible.
That's true. It's natural.
So the mere fact of feeling guilty is not at all the same thing as criminal guilt.
Not at all.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
But, Dr. Anderson, you did say that a particularly detailed examination was called for.
Yes.
Why was that?
Because of the quite excessive amount of guilt I felt the mother was demonstrating.
Yes, and about this fall, Doctor, you did say, didn't you, it'd be very unusual for a fall down some stairs to result in such an injury.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, to strike the head here, the body must have been falling backwards down the stairs.
Yes, and with sufficient force so that the head struck first before the back or hips.
With sufficient force. Yes. Thank you, Doctor.
But I didn't hit him. He fell. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. You can't say that I hit him. I didn't. I didn't.
Mrs. Morgan.
But I can't listen to him saying that. I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
I think you better take her down. I take it you had finished, Mr. Parsons?
Yes, Manuel.
And I think we'll adjourn for today.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Morgan will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Mrs. Linda Morgan is charged with causing grievous bodily harm to her child, Julian. Her husband divorced her 2 years ago on the grounds that her persistent beating of the children made the marriage intolerable. However, since the divorce, the children have continued to visit her, against the wishes of her former husband and against the orders of a divorce court judge. During one of the visits, Julian was severely injured. After a complaint to the police by the husband, Mrs. Morgan was charged.
Sergeant Davis, were you on duty at Fulster Police Station on May the 23rd last year?
Yes, sir, I was.
And were you visited by Mr. Peter Morgan?
Yes, sir. Mr. Morgan came into the station and said he had a complaint to make against his wife. He said that his child had just been admitted to the General Hospital with severe head injuries, and that he believed his wife had caused them.
Yes, so what action did you take?
I reported the matter to my inspector, then I went to the hospital to interview Mrs. Morgan and ask her to come back to the station.
And Sergeant, will you tell the court what happened when you first saw Mrs. Morgan?
Yes, sir. May I use my notebook, my lord?
Were they made at the time?
Yes, my lord.
Very well.
Thank you, my lord. As soon as she saw me, she tried to run down the corridor away from me. She was shouting, "I didn't do it. I didn't hit him." I ran after her, and she was stopped by 2 nurses.
Yes, and she accompanied you to the station.
Yes, sir.
Did she make a statement there?
Yes, sir, she did. She said the boy was running about the flat making a lot of noise. She was worried about the people in the flat below. She told him to be quiet. The boy then went out onto the landing. She heard him playing with a ball against the wall, and she went out to stop him. She said that he was standing at the top of the stairs. She reached out to lead him back into the flat. However, he evaded her hand, twisting his body round. He lost his balance and fell backwards down the stairs.
She definitely said that she reached out her hand towards the boy.
Yes, sir. She said, "I just wanted to take him by the shoulder and take him indoors."
I see. Had you known Mrs. Morgan before at all, Sergeant?
No, sir.
I see. I would have thought perhaps in view of the divorce proceedings that the matter might have been reported to the police.
Not necessarily, sir. If an adult gets beaten up, the police get to know right away. But if it's a child, it seems that everyone concerned is so concerned about the mother, the child doesn't matter.
My lord, is this strictly relevant?
No, I don't think so. Mr. Parsons, I should be grateful if you didn't lead your witness into discussions of a general nature.
As your lordship pleases. Thank you, Sergeant.
Sergeant, during all the time you're questioning Mrs. Morgan, did she for one moment do anything but protest her innocence?
No, she didn't.
Yet she was charged.
Yes, she was.
But you have testified that not for one moment did she do anything but protest her innocence.
Yes, but we thought that because of previous history of assaults on the children, there was a prima facie case against her.
Even though you couldn't find one shred of evidence that the assault named in this charge actually occurred?
Miss Merritt, I don't follow this line of argument.
My lord, I wish to establish absolutely in the jury's mind that the accused is standing in the dock for things she may or may not have done 2 or 3 years ago, without which she would not be standing here today.
Very well. I do think you've done all you possibly can in that direction. Perhaps you'd care to continue?
As your lordship pleases. Sergeant, in all your experience, you must have met people who feel so generally guilty that they arouse suspicions about a particular act they in fact have nothing to do with.
It can happen.
Thank you, Sergeant. Now, in answer to my learned friend, you seem to express some resentment against the social agencies concerned with the problems of assaults on children.
We do feel sometimes that social workers do not report all the criminal acts on children because of too much concern for the criminal.
You will remember, Miss Merritt, that I did ask Mr. Parsons not to lead his witness into discussions of a general nature.
My lord. Sergeant, I put it to you that your whole treatment of the accused was governed by the resentment felt by the police at not being notified of previous possible incidents.
No, we were merely acting on present information received.
And that your questioning of Mrs. Morgan was almost entirely concerned with incidents that have nothing actually to do with the accident on May the 23rd.
No. There was no actual witness to the incident. It was our duty, therefore, to investigate all the circumstantial evidence.
Can I put it to you, Sergeant, that because you couldn't find any actual evidence of an assault on May the 23rd, you scraped the barrel for all the evidence you could find to fling at the accused and make a charge stick?
My lord, I must object to this line of questioning.
So do I, Mr. Parsons. Miss Merritt, the court has already ruled the evidence of previous assaults is material in this case, so perhaps you'd better consider whether or not this line of questioning is in the best interests of your client.
I beg your lordship's pardon. I have now finished with this witness.
You are Doreen Hughes, a neighbour of Linda Morgan?
Yes, I am. I live in the flat below.
Yes. One could say a friend of Linda Morgan's?
Well, not a friend exactly. We pass the time of day occasionally, you know.
I see. Now, what can you tell us concerning the events of May the 23rd last year, Mrs. Hughes?
Oh, dreadful it was. I was really shocked to see Mrs. Morgan standing there like that.
Yes, Mrs. Hughes, can we just take it step by step? When did you first realize that Mrs. Morgan's children were upstairs?
Well, I'd known for about half an hour. Flats aren't very soundproof, you know, never meant for families. I always say to my husband
Yes,
that...
so you heard the children making a noise.
Well, I heard Julian running along the corridor, and then I heard Mrs. Morgan shouting at him.
Shouting, you say?
That's right, shouting.
Could you hear what she was saying?
Well, not exactly all of it. You naughty boy, she was saying. And then I heard this bump, and then I heard Mrs. Morgan screaming.
Yes, could you hear what she was saying then?
Oh, she was carrying on terribly. Why did you do that, she said. I never touched you, things like that.
Yes. So what did you do then?
Oh, I went out to see what was the matter.
Yes. And what did you see?
Oh, the boy was lying on the stairs, head down. He was unconscious. Mrs. Morgan was standing at the top of the stairs, one hand holding the banisters, and the other one stretched out as though she'd pushed the boy.
Right, Miss Merritt. Mrs. Hughes, you must not draw conclusions from what you saw. That is for the jury. Just say what you saw.
Oh, she had a hand out like this.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes.
Mrs. Hughes, you said you weren't a friend of Mrs. Morgan's.
That's right.
Since when have you not been friends?
I don't know what you mean. We'd only lived below her. Well, she'd only lived above us for a few years.
But nevertheless, isn't it true, Mrs. Hughes, that you used to spend quite a lot of time in each other's company?
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
But isn't it true, Mrs. Hughes, that you used to drop in on each other for coffee in the mornings?
We have done.
Thank you. But now you don't.
Oh, we haven't for a little while.
Since when?
Well, I couldn't say exactly.
Since June the 5th?
Well, I couldn't put an exact date on it.
Could you not? Mrs. Morgan can. June the 5th was when she appeared in the magistrate's court.
Oh, it could be about then.
And you were in the magistrate's court too, weren't you?
Oh, she didn't ask me to go, I just went.
And you heard there many of the allegations that we have heard today.
Yes.
Since then, there's been no dropping in for coffee, no little chats on the landing, no going to the supermarkets together. Isn't that true, Mrs. Hughes?
Yes, it is true. But wouldn't you be the same? Who would have thought she was that sort of woman?
What sort of woman, Mrs. Hughes?
Well, the sort who'd beat up her children, would half kill her son.
That has not been proved, Mrs. Hughes. Did you know anything about Mrs. Morgan's marriage before?
No, doesn't surprise me. She wanted to keep it dark.
Now, after the incident on May the 23rd, you were very kind to Mrs. Morgan. She tells me that you offered to let her sleep in your flat until she'd recovered from the shock.
Yes.
And that you visited her at least twice a day to see if she was all right.
Well, I did drop in from time to time.
But not after June the 5th. Why?
Well, I've told you I can't
Yes,
remember
you've
the
told
exact
us,
date.
Mrs. Hughes. You also came here to give evidence against Mrs. Morgan concerning the events of May the 23rd.
Well, I had to.
Yes, I do know. Now, Mrs. Morgan, you believe that you saw on May the 23rd evidence that Mrs. Morgan had ill-treated her son.
Yes.
But you didn't think that on May the 24th, or the 25th, or the 26th, or at any time until June the 5th. What happened on June the 5th?
Well, you know that. I went to the magistrate's court.
That's right. You went to the magistrate's court and you heard all sorts of stories about Mrs. Morgan's former marriage. Well, isn't that true, Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
And immediately looking back on the events of May the 23rd, you could see what had happened in a different light.
It made things clearer.
It altered your view of things.
You could say that.
Yes, I can say that, Mrs. Hughes, because it's true. But you are here to tell us about what happened on May the 23rd, not to give us a version in the light of all sorts of irrelevant and subsequent knowledge. So, let us get back to May the 23rd. You say you had a bump. You heard screaming, you ran out, found the boy on the stairs, and Mrs. Morgan in an acute state of distress.
Yes.
You then took charge of the situation, called for an ambulance, calmed Mrs. Morgan, and so on.
Yes.
And I put it to you, Mrs. Hughes, that at no time during that day did it occur to you that you had witnessed the aftermath of a criminal assault.
No.
Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. Members of the jury, I shan't spend any time on an opening address to you. As you will have heard, the prosecution's case rests entirely on circumstantial evidence. In fact, it rests on the simple question, do you believe that Mrs. Morgan is the sort of woman who would push her son down the stairs? You will now be able to see for yourselves. You are Linda Morgan?
Yes.
You understand that the prosecution has chosen to introduce as evidence in this case details of your former marriage, and we shall have to examine this in some detail.
Yes.
Mrs. Morgan, why did you not defend yourself at the divorce trial?
I wanted the divorce. I had to have it.
Why?
Well, he was a bully. It was driving me mad.
But in the divorce hearings, the case was that it was you who was the bully, that you continually and cruelly struck your children, so much so that the marriage became intolerable to your former husband.
Well, that wasn't the reason why he wanted to get rid of me.
Do you mean you didn't strike your children?
Well, yes, I did. But I always loved them. Far more than he did.
But if you loved them, why did you hit them?
If I could only answer that question.
I'm afraid you must try.
Well, everything used to get on top of me. He would come home from work and straight away it would start. He was always complaining and finding fault. He used to say I was a terrible housekeeper. When I set the tea, he used to pick up his cup and examine it to see if it was clean.
Were you a bad housekeeper?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Oh, I'm not a very tidy person. Everything isn't always just so, but it's all right.
But not good enough to satisfy your husband?
Nothing I could do could have satisfied him.
But you did try?
Oh, yes, I tried.
What about the physical side of your marriage, Mrs. Morgan?
Well, there wasn't any. Not after Jennifer.
Well, why was that?
I don't know. He just didn't like me, I suppose.
Did you miss this side of the relationship with your husband?
Well, I don't know. I suppose I did, but compared with everything else, it didn't seem important. In a way, I was glad when he took to sleeping in the spare room. It meant I had a few hours when he wasn't always on at me.
Surely you didn't just abandon your marriage?
Well, in the last couple of years, I'm afraid I did. The last straw was the birthday cake.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was his birthday. We hadn't made any plans for it or anything. I'm sure he'd forgotten about it, or if he had remembered, he'd assumed I had. Well, he went off to work, and as soon as he'd gone, I set about making this marvellous cake. Well, I did, but I had to wait for a while for it to cool before I decorated it. Well, I managed it before he came home, but, well, the children had made a mess in the living room with their toys, and I hadn't made the beds. Well, he came home a little early, and before I could explain about the birthday cake, he was in a terrible temper.
Shouting at you?
No, he didn't shout. That wasn't his way. He just seemed to get colder and colder and more cutting.
What happened then?
But I threw it at him.
You threw the cake at him?
Well, not exactly threw it. I was coming up behind him as he was sitting at the table. He hadn't seen it, and, well, all of a sudden he said something, and I just lifted the cake and sort of pressed it onto his head. Well, it was all spongy and creamy. It looked really funny. The children laughed, but he told them to shut up, and they did. And he turned round and just looked at me.
What did he say to you?
Nothing. He just looked.
What did you say to him?
Happy birthday.
It may seem funny now, Mrs. Morgan, but I don't suppose it did at the time.
Oh, no. He went out and washed and left the house. I didn't see him again until the next morning at breakfast.
Did he refer to the incident?
No, he never mentioned it. Never. It was then I gave up. It was hopeless.
Mrs. Morgan, did you often hit your children?
Yes.
Why?
Well, everything used to get on top of me. I got so screwed up. I mean, I wanted to keep the place tidy, not just for my husband. I mean, I wanted it tidy too. I loved them. I really loved them, but sometimes, well, it was too much, and you know children and my husband...
Relax, Mrs. Morgan.
I
Let's
know,
take it very slowly.
It's just...
Yes, I know. Now, Could you try and give us an example of the kind of thing that happened?
One day I was cleaning the front windows, and Julian was in the living room. He was about 4 then, I suppose. Well, when I came back, he'd scribbled on the walls. I know children do things like that. I know he didn't mean any harm, but, well, my husband had just painted the wall, and I was furious, and I just hit him, and he moved his head, and I caught him high up in the cheek. When my husband came home, Julian had a black eye.
What was your husband's attitude?
He was very angry with me. He told me I shouldn't have left the child alone in the room. I told him it was only for a few minutes, that I couldn't watch him every second.
What did he say about the eye?
I told him that Julian had hit it on the table.
Did he believe that?
No.
What did he do?
Repainted the wall.
That night?
Oh, yes, straight away. He hated to see anything like that.
And that sort of thing happened fairly frequently?
Yes.
You must speak up clearly, Mrs. Morgan, so that the jury can hear you.
I'm sorry, yes. Oh, I should have left him then and taken the children with me. I can see that now.
But you didn't?
Well, no, I didn't see how I could manage. I didn't have any money or anyone to turn to. I just didn't know what to do.
Did you go and see your doctor?
Oh, yes. I was always round there. He used to give me tranquilizers, but they didn't do any good. Oh, I felt all right when I took them, but they made me feel sleepy, and I got less done than before, so it was always worse in the end.
Did you ever tell your doctor that you struck the children?
No, I was too ashamed.
I see. And so he really couldn't understand how serious the problem was?
I don't suppose he did.
Yes, and finally your husband divorced you?
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
But then I was just relieved that it was all over.
But the children?
I know. I felt very badly about the children. But what could I do? My husband said that if I contested the divorce, that he'd bring in the police and have me locked up. And in any case, I just couldn't cope anymore. I just wanted it to be all over.
Yes, I see. But you did still see the children?
Yes. Well, I didn't at first. I'd left home and got myself a flat. And one day I saw Julian coming home from school with Jennifer, and they came home with me.
Mrs. Morgan, did you entice them home?
I don't know what that means. Julian asked me where I lived. I told him. He said he'd like to see it, so I invited them.
But you knew that the court had ordered you not to see them.
They were my children. I know I hadn't treated them very well, but I still love them. He should let me see them. It's cruel.
He found out about the visits, didn't he?
Yes. I got a solicitor's letter telling me not to see them again, and later I had to go to the divorce court, and the judge told me again.
But you still saw them?
Well, I told them they mustn't come. But after a week or two, they turned up on my doorstep one Saturday morning. Well, I couldn't turn my own children away, could I? I couldn't slam the door in their faces.
Why did they come to see you, Mrs. Morgan?
Because they still love me. They wanted to see me. God knows I hadn't deserved it, but they did.
Yes, I see. Now, let's come to the afternoon of May the 23rd. What happened precisely?
Well, Julian and Jennifer had come round about 4 o'clock. Well, I told them that they could only stay for a few minutes, or their father would be very cross with us. Well, Julian was very excited to be there. I don't know why, but he kept leaping about the place. And I told him that he must be quiet, as I now live in a flat and you can easily disturb the neighbours. Well, naturally, I didn't want any trouble involving the children. But, well, Julian produced a ball from his pocket and began bouncing it around the room. So I told him to stop, and I went out to get the ice cream that I'd promised them from the fridge. Well, when I came back, Julian wasn't there, and the door was open. I could hear him out on the landing playing with the ball, bouncing it in the wall. So I ran out, and he was standing on the top step. I told him to come inside, and he said he'd just bounce it once more. Well, I reached out to take him by the shoulder, and he moved out of the way and lost his footing and fell backwards down the steps.
Do you feel well enough to go on?
I'll be all right.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Morgan, to press you on this. Were you hitting the boy?
No, I haven't touched either of them since the divorce. It's been different altogether.
You haven't touched them, not once?
No.
And Julian was just playing with you?
Yes, he was laughing. Well, I wasn't very serious either.
So it was a pure accident?
Yes, as God's my witness, it was an accident.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan.
Are you very fond of ice cream, Mrs. Morgan?
Not very.
But you did like it as a child.
Yes,
Did we grow out of childish tastes?
yes.
Yes. Why then did you have ice cream in your refrigerator?
Well, it was just there.
Yes, I know it was there. I'm asking you why it was there.
Well, it's useful. It makes a quick sweet if anyone comes, visitors.
Yes, do you have many visitors, Mrs. Morgan?
No, not many.
Well, how many?
Well, it's difficult to say.
Well, I shouldn't think so. How many people have you had for a meal, say, in the last 3 months?
None.
Yes. So the ice cream in the fridge can't really be accounted for in the way you suggest.
Well,
See, I put it to you, Mrs. Morgan, the ice cream was there precisely for the use you described, to give to the children.
to give to any visitors.
Yes, but you told us, and I quote your own words, I went out to get the ice cream I'd promised them from the fridge.
Yes, when they arrived. When they came in, I told them I had some ice cream and that they could have some.
Yes, when they arrived, but surely they arrived because of the ice cream in the fridge, because of the lollipops in the sweet jar, because of the toys in the cupboard.
No, they came to see me, not for anything else.
Come, Mrs. Morgan, you're asking the jury to believe that they came to see their loving mother who doesn't live with them anymore because she used to beat them?
It's not true. It wasn't like that.
It was like that, Mrs. Morgan. At least the divorce court judge thought so, because he ordered you to stop enticing your children.
But they loved me. They wanted to see me. Well, Jennifer used to run to me for hugs and cuddles. She did. They were fed up with that cold fish of a father.
You must try and control yourself, Mrs. Morgan.
Well, how can I do that when he says I entice my own children? They love me. They do. Ask them. They do.
I think we should adjourn for today. Miss Merritt, perhaps you could have a word with your client before the court reconvenes tomorrow?
Yes, my lord.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Morgan will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. Mrs. Linda Morgan is charged with assaulting her son Julian, who is still lying unconscious in hospital. Mrs. Morgan was divorced by her husband on the ground of cruelty to the children. Custody of them was given to their father. However, the children still visited their mother from time to time, against the wishes of their father. On one visit, Julian was injured in a fall downstairs, and Mrs. Morgan was charged with assaulting him.
Now, Mrs. Morgan, yesterday you denied that you had the ice cream in the refrigerator for your children.
I said I had it for visitors in general.
Well, I think if you recall... in
Could I
fact,
say
what you-
something?
If you wish.
Well, I did have the ice cream for visitors, but of course I knew that the most likely visitors would be my children. I hadn't enticed them, as you said. I hadn't promised them that if they came, I would give them ice cream, but of course I knew that they would come of their own accord, and naturally I wanted something to give them when they did come.
I see. Very well, Mrs. Morgan. You do realise you're on oath, don't you?
Yes.
Mrs. Morgan, how often did you used to hit your children?
I hardly touched Jennifer at all, just a slap.
Yes, and Julian?
I used to hit him more.
How often?
I can't say.
Well, once a day, once a week, once a month?
I can't say. I don't keep a diary.
Ah, I see. Very well. Well, why did you hit him?
Well, because he was a boy, I suppose. He was boisterous and noisy at times. Of course, I realise it wasn't reasonable to hit them. I've explained.
Yes, we've heard your explanation. So you used to hit him when he disobeyed you, wouldn't stop making a noise and so on.
Yes.
Right, very well. Let's go back to May the 23rd last year. Mrs. Morgan, you said that you told Julian to be quiet in your flat.
Yes.
And stop playing with his ball.
Yes.
But he disobeyed you.
Well, he's a child.
Answer the question.
Yes.
Yes. Now, think back a couple of years, Mrs. Morgan. What would you have done to Julian then if he disobeyed you?
I'd have hit him.
Well, I put it to you, that is exactly what you did on May the 23rd last year.
No.
I put it to you, you were angry with Julian because he had disobeyed you. He ran out of the room, you followed him and hit him.
No.
Well, how then do you explain your attitude after the incident? Because both the doctor and the policeman have said that any reference to hitting Julian obsessed you.
Well, of course it did. I knew what people would say. For 2 years, ever since the divorce, I felt so guilty about the way I treated those kids. As soon as it happened, I knew what would happen. I knew.
All right, Mrs. Morgan. Well, let's come to the divorce, shall we? You described your husband as a cold, unfeeling man.
He was.
You think that a man should come home to find that his wife's been beating his children and then treat her warmly and lovingly? You ask a great deal of a man, Mrs. Morgan.
But it wasn't like that. It was because he was so cold that the whole thing happened. I couldn't see it at the time. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was all on top of me, weighing me down.
Yes, but however cold your husband was, did that justify you hitting your children?
Of course not, but...
I mean, did he ever strike you?
No.
So the only violence used in the house was yours.
I suppose so.
Yes. You see, we still have the fact that you did not contest the divorce, which was based on the grounds of cruelty to the children.
But I wouldn't have contested the divorce, whatever the grounds were. If my husband had said that I'd slept with a whole street of men and machine-gunned a whole school of kids, I wouldn't have denied it if it meant I didn't have to see him again.
Well, you must have hated him a great deal, Mrs. Morgan.
Yes, I did.
Was that what gave you such pleasure when the children came to see you? Was that a way of getting back at him?
I can see why you're representing my husband. You make a fine pair of cold bastards.
Mrs. Morgan, you will not use language like that in this court. Counsel is not representing your husband. He represents the Queen as head of the state, which is prosecuting you. I warn you most solemnly that any further language or conduct which may be interpreted as a contempt of this court will be treated by me very firmly indeed. You understand?
Yes, my lord. I'm very sorry.
Very well, Mr. Parsons, you may continue.
Thank you, my lord. I have no further questions.
Do you regret the course of action you adopted over the divorce proceedings?
Oh, yes, I do. If I had my time over again, knowing what I know now, I'd have fought him all the way for the custody of the children.
And do you believe that it was your husband's behaviour towards you that led to the striking of the children?
Yes, absolutely. I haven't touched them since. Not that that excuses my treatment of them before. I just didn't know what I was doing.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. I have no further questions, my lord.
You may return to the dock, Mrs. Morgan.
You are Dr. Rupert Lawrence,
I am.
and you practice at Amble Green, Fulchester.
That's correct.
You are Mrs. Morgan's doctor.
Yes, I have been for 14 years.
Can you recall Mrs. Morgan coming to see you during the latter part of her marriage?
Yes.
Why did she come?
She was depressed. I talked with her, treated her with tranquilizers.
Did she ever mention her children?
Well, she used to say that she was too miserable to look after them properly. They were getting a raw deal.
She never mentioned that she hit them.
No.
Did you see the children yourself?
Occasionally. Various childish ailments.
But you never suspected that they were being in any way ill-treated?
Well, I recall once seeing Julian with a bruised rib. Mrs. Morgan said it had happened in a fall.
And you accepted her explanation?
No reason why I shouldn't.
No. Have you seen Mrs. Morgan since her divorce?
Well, not until a month ago. She came to me and explained everything that had happened.
How did she seem to you then?
A new woman. Well, she was obviously distressed about the court case, but she didn't want any tablets, just to talk.
And you saw a markedly different woman from the depressed creature you used to see?
Oh, absolutely. Different woman.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Lawrence, why did Mrs. Morgan come to see you a month ago?
Well, she wanted a medical examination. That's what doctors are for.
Was she ill?
No.
You mean the doctors are for examining healthy people?
Well, sometimes. Our job is to keep people healthy as well as to cure their sickness.
Yes, I know that, Doctor, but I suggest to you that Mrs. Morgan came to see you so you could come and tell us what a wonderfully different woman she'd become.
She wanted an objective assessment of the change, certainly.
Yes, and you hadn't seen her for 2 years.
No.
And suddenly she turns up wanting a checkup.
Yes.
I see. And you were able to do as she asked.
If anyone asks me for a medical opinion, I can usually manage that, yes.
And this browbeaten and overwhelmed woman had become serene and radiant, had she?
Those are your terms, not mine.
Well, what were yours, Doctor? A different woman, a new woman, a markedly different woman? You restate that?
Yes, I'd say that was true.
Yes, I'm sure you would, but with respect, Doctor, I think we must just be a little cautious of your opinion, mustn't we?
No? What do you mean?
Well, have you heard of the term battered baby syndrome?
Yes, of course.
Yes, it's a common phenomenon, isn't it?
It is now, yes.
Yes, and has been in medical circles for some 10 years. I believe the phrase was first coined by Dr. Henry Kemper in 1961.
I would accept that.
Yes, thank you. Well, 10 years after that, you were seeing the children of a depressed mother showing signs of injury, bruised ribs and so forth, and it didn't occur to you that they might have been receiving a battering from their mother.
My lord, Dr. Lawrence is not on trial here. My learned friend is treating him as if he were the accused.
My lord, Dr. Lawrence has been introduced as an expert witness on behalf of the defense. Surely I should be allowed to test his expertise.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you, my lord. Dr. Lawrence, I put the question to you again. Didn't it occur to you that these children might be receiving a battering from their mother?
It did not occur to me, no. The mother was obviously showing considerable concern for their welfare.
Come, Doctor. Surely that's a classical presentation of the battered baby syndrome.
Yes, sometimes. Oh, yes, it does happen.
Yes, thank you. The fact is, you didn't spot the trouble, did you?
No.
But you want to tell us that Mrs. Morgan's a different woman?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
No further questions, my lord.
Thank you, Doctor. Will either of you be needing doctors again?
No, my lord.
I'm sure you're a busy man, Doctor. You can leave if you wish.
Thank you, my lord.
I wish to call Jennifer Morgan. She is 8 years old.
Mr. Parsons?
My lord, we do feel her rather too young to be reliable, but no doubt your lordship would like to see her.
Bring her in. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, Judge.
You know who I am, then?
Yes,
How do you know I'm a judge?
because you've got that funny wig on.
So I have. And so those people behind you. Who do you think they are?
They're only learning to be judges.
Why do you think that?
Because they're sitting down there and you're in the big chair.
Like a teacher, eh?
Yes.
But this isn't a classroom, Jennifer. This is a courtroom. Do you know what a court is?
It's the place you have to go if you're naughty. The police take you there.
And what happens there?
The judge tells you off and sends you to prison.
Only if you have been naughty. The court is a place where they decide whether a person has been naughty or not. Do you understand? Do you ever tell lies?
No.
Never told a lie in your life?
I did once.
We all do once. But it's very, very naughty to tell lies in court. In fact, you have to promise not to. Promise faithfully. Well, Jennifer seems a bright child. I think she can give evidence. I don't think she's mature enough to give sworn evidence.
As your lordship pleases.
We shall adjourn now. I don't think it would be right to interrupt Jennifer's evidence, so we'll adjourn early. Jennifer, we're going to have lunch now, and afterwards I want you to tell us what we want to know. All right?
Yes, Judge.
I gather you like ice cream.
Yes.
Well, if I were you, I should ask the policewoman to let you have some for lunch. Members of the jury, I've instructed that Jennifer be kept outside whilst I have a word with you. I want to tell you about children's evidence. I have to decide whether a child is able to give evidence. Briefly, I can decide the child is perfectly capable, in which case I would allow the child to give sworn evidence as any other witness. Or I can decide that the child has something of value to offer to the court, but it would not be safe to rely on the weight of his evidence as much as one would on normal evidence. Nor, therefore, would it be fair to the child to make her take an oath, the importance of which she might not understand. As you know, that is what I have decided in the case of Jennifer. She will not be sworn, but listen to her evidence and, using your judgment, decide what weight her evidence will bear. Bring in the child. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, Lord.
Well, they've told you that I'm not normally called judge, have they? Well, I'm usually called my lord. You look lost down there. Would you like to come up here and sit with me? Come on, then. Now, that lady over there, that's Miss Merritt. You know her, don't you? And that's Mr. Parsons over there. Now, they're going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them perfectly truthfully. Remember, it's very, very naughty to tell lies in court.
Hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
Can you see your mummy?
Yes.
Where is she? Yes, that's right. Do you know why she's here?
Daddy says she's been very naughty and hit Julian and broken his skull.
Yes. Well, your daddy believes that's true, but he wasn't there. Now, you were there when it happened, and we want you to tell us what you know.
You understand, Jennifer? We want you to tell us what you remember of that afternoon.
Yes.
You do remember that afternoon, don't you, Jennifer?
Yes.
What were you doing?
I was helping Mummy get the ice cream.
What was Julian doing?
He was playing with a ball.
What did your mummy say to him?
She told him he had to stop.
And did he?
No.
What happened then?
Julian went out onto the landing to play, and Mummy went out and told him to stop.
Now, what did you hear then?
I heard a bump and Mummy shouting.
Now, Jennifer, this is very important. Was your mummy shouting before you heard the bump?
What we want to know, Jennifer, was your mother angry before you heard the bump of Julian falling downstairs? Was she very angry with him?
Quite angry, not very, very angry.
You do remember times when your mummy used to get very, very angry like that, don't you, Jennifer? And what would she have done to Julian then?
Remember, you have to tell the truth.
Sometimes she hit him.
Very hard?
Sometimes.
Now, on that afternoon, was your mummy very, very angry like that? Will you tell everybody?
No, she wasn't angry like that.
Did she often hit Julian?
Only when he was naughty.
Now, Jennifer, you haven't lived with your mummy for some time, have you?
No.
But you did see her sometimes?
Yes.
Now, tell me, Jennifer, after starting to see her again, did she ever hit you or Julian?
She never hit me.
Did she ever hit Julian after she wasn't living with you?
I don't think so.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Jennifer, your daddy said that you mustn't go and see your mummy anymore, didn't he?
Yes.
But you did go.
Julian took me
Ah, I see. Why did you go?
to see Mummy.
Yes, because she had all sorts of nice things for you to eat.
Ice cream and biscuits.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Jennifer, did you go to your mummy's just for the nice things to eat?
No,
Why did you go?
it was nice there. Mummy used to give us hugs and things.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's all, my lord.
Right, Jennifer. You've done very well. You can go now.
Will Mummy have to go to prison?
Well, we can't say yet. Off you go.
And so, members of the jury, we come to this vexed question of circumstantial evidence. No doubt my learned friend will wax eloquently on the subject. But do remember that circumstantial evidence is evidence. What you have to do is to weigh up the facts. Now, we know that the accused hit Julian frequently and with considerable force before her divorce. She didn't deny that at divorce proceedings. She doesn't deny it now. We know that she disobeyed court orders forbidding her to see her children because the court felt that she was not a fit and proper person to have anything to do with children. We know that Julian was disobeying her that day, that she was worried about the noise, and in Jennifer's words, that she was quite angry. We know, because Mrs. Morgan stated it in the box, that she reached out to Julian. She says it was taken back into the room. You have to decide, considering the history of this case, whether that is a likely story or not. And let me say a word about Jennifer's evidence. There's an old saying in theatrical circles, you must never work with children or animals. They'll steal the show. It's the same in court. No counsel looks forward to the prospect of cross-examining a child for fear of appearing to browbeat her. So do be careful in your assessment of Jennifer's evidence. And remember, his lordship didn't think it safe to allow her to give sworn testimony. Finally, members of the jury, remember Julian Morgan. It seems that during this trial we have heard much about divorce proceedings and jokes about birthday cakes, past histories of this and that, so much so that at times it seems to me we've heard the silent voice of Julian Morgan resounding throughout this court, reminding us that he has been deeply unconscious since May the 23rd last year as a result of falling down some stairs or as a result of something much more sinister?
My learned friend said I would wax eloquent on the theme of circumstantial evidence. If by that he meant that I would want to warn you of the dangers of accepting it too easily, he is absolutely right. The law must rest on certainties. It is the only safe way. Of course, circumstantial evidence can be useful in supporting the evidence of eyewitnesses. But in this case, we have no eyewitnesses. We have only ear witnesses. One of them a disloyal neighbor. But no one who actually saw what happened. Now, I would suggest to you, members of the jury, that the Crown has not succeeded in putting before you sufficient evidence upon which you can safely convict. Finally, let me too deal with Jennifer's evidence. My learned friend invited your sympathy at not being able to fully cross-examine Jennifer. Now, I put it to you, members of the jury, that what we saw in the witness box, I beg your pardon, on the bench, was a little girl who loves her mother. And I also put it to you that we would not have seen her here today if she truly believed that her mother had acted as violently as the prosecution allege. You have seen for yourselves how distraught Mrs. Morgan is at the grave condition of her son, a condition, I submit, for which she can in no way be held responsible.
Both counsel have discussed, in their summing up of this case, circumstantial evidence. It only remains for me to say that it is evidence admissible in a court of law. And if it's strong enough, it is perfectly lawful to find a person guilty on the strength of it. It is your duty to examine the evidence very carefully. If you come to the conclusion that Mrs. Morgan is the kind of person who, in the circumstances described, did strike Julian, then you must find her guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there is any doubt at all, you must return a verdict of not guilty. Will you now please retire and consider your verdict and try and reach a unanimous verdict?
All stand.
Will the foreman of the jury please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
And do you find the defendant, Linda Morgan, guilty or not guilty on the charge of assault occasioning grievous bodily harm?
Not guilty.